Kijk ek hierso nie. Moet ek daai ding afsit?
Ja, jy kan.
Ek is so bly jy's hier. Dankie. Networking is a critical component of business success. It is important what you know, but the who you know is also important. This very element is something that is readily available through engaging in a membership platform. To engage with industry peers and share ideas in an age where we compete and collaborate on a global scale can provide a huge competitive advantage. The concept of membership is not new, but its role and value has been transformed in the current dynamic and fast-paced business world. Being a member of a well-respected institution offers credibility and a sense of belonging. Membership provides a platform for access to information about the industry. Being a member brings you into a community of like-minded professionals whose aim is to share, learn, and progress in their profession. Membership can provide an opportunity for individuals and organizations to contribute and give back to their communities through various initiatives. SAPEX membership provides the following benefits: belonging to a community of industry professionals who share your interests, regular contact on a platform of your choice, sharing of industry updates and news on both a local and international scale, discounted pricing on industry events, international certifications, and other activities or events relevant to the industry and profession, recognition as a professional in your industry, networking opportunities across local and multinational industries within the supply chain profession, online platforms for participating in numerous events that are hosted by SAPEX makes connectivity simple. SAPEX is not a new kid on the block. SAPEX is the professional body for supply chain management. With its history as a membership body spanning more than 50 years, SAPEX has tremendous experience in providing value-added services to members. SAPEX is a platform where members can advance their careers through learning, benchmarking, and networking. Types of membership include individual membership, joint SAPEX and ASCM membership, student membership, young professional membership, corporate membership, and membership specifically for SMMEs. Visit our website for more information and sign up today.
Good morning and welcome. Wow, day 2 of the SAPEX conference, and I must say the team has done an amazing job bringing us all together here in this virtual room, and it's been so exciting. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Shanti Wilson, and I am one of the SAPEX directors. But more importantly today, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about women in supply chain and to introduce our speakers. As we know, August is Women's Month, and changing the gender diversity within South Africa is a challenge, and it's something that is on everyone's agenda. But as I recollect back and think back to my time in supply chain over the last 20 years, it is very rare to sit in a boardroom and see more than one woman at the boardroom table, if any. And often when I work with clients, so this is not just in organizations I've worked for, but multiple organizations, this theme is a very consistent theme. And the question we need to ask is, how do we shift this dynamic? How do we create positive change? How do we create an environment that is conducive to women in the workplace and women in leadership roles? Today, we are exceptionally privileged to have DENINE SMIT with us. But before I go into introducing DENINE, what I would like to do is make a huge thank you to Imperial. Imperial have sponsored today's sessions. We've got 2 sessions back on back all around women and leadership and supply chain. In addition, they are going to be partnering with us on various initiatives around women and youth development in the supply chain, because these are 2 very important initiatives that create growth and opportunities for women to learn, to develop, and to create a community that supports them. Which is why it's quite interesting to hear about what DENINE's going to be talking about today. So first of all, a huge thank you to Imperial for sponsoring this session. We really are grateful. and it's hugely beneficial, I think, to everyone in the room. And now to introduce DENINE. So our speaker this morning, the first speaker, is Dr. DENINE SMIT. And although she goes by the name doctor or professor, she is also a human like the rest of us. Her passion is her two Scotties, Joshua and Maxie, and taking them for beach walks. They go to work with her. She is someone who doesn't have any kids of her own, but habitually adopts kids out of her class as a professor at the University of the Free State. DENINE specializes in labor law, but specifically focuses on bullying in the workplace, sexual harassment, and unfair discrimination issues. And she's published many academic papers on the topic. Today, we are very privileged to learn more about the queen bee syndrome, where it looks at the impact the queen bee can have on a community of women, whereby one woman might do things to the detriment of others in a predominantly male environment. But I'm not going to steal her thunder. I'm not going to give you the speech. I'm going to hand over now to Dr. DENINE SMIT and let her take you through this insightful and interesting talk, because I really think there's going to be huge value in that. Thank you, DENINE, from all of us at SAPEX. We really appreciate you giving up your time to be with us today.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Shanti, for the introduction. And I would also like to thank Imperial for sponsoring today's SAPEX meeting. I would first of all like to extend a hearty welcome to all my fellow bees in the hive this morning. I know that this is quite a controversial topic, but I believe it's something that needs to be addressed in the sense that this might be one of the barriers that gender equality is still problematic despite ample legislation running through the Constitution, through the Employment Equity Act. So let's start. Well, first of all, in nature, the queen bee dictates the gender of the beehive by excreting pheromones that make other female bees infertile, thereby monopolising male bees to attend to her every need. Now, I know that you might ask yourself, are you in the right session this morning? And my answer is definitely yes, because the queen bee is problematic in the sense that females keep other females down. Now, for years, the question has been asked whether this is a myth or whether this is a fact, and we will address that as we proceed. Unfortunately, the whole keeping the hive man-like, this behavior is not limited to nature, and it's being mimicked in the modern workplace. I believe we could view this as another form of a glass ceiling or a form of workplace bullying by females, specifically towards other females in employment, thereby not assisting other females to make it through the ranks. And that's one of the reasons that our boardrooms look the way they look. Now, from a more academic perspective, the term queen bee was already coined as far back as in 1974 by academic researchers who found that females operating in male hierarchies set out to protect their rare turf by creating a barrier, one, to entry, and secondly, to advancement through the rank. So what is the queen bee syndrome? Well, the queen bee syndrome refers to highly ranking females in a predominantly male or masculine environment. This then excludes females just being icky towards other females if they are not occupying high-ranking positions. The emphasis is also on a traditional or predominantly male or masculine environment. And it reminds me of the old saying of the old boys club. So whenever a female makes it in the old boys club, this is where the queen bee syndrome actually could be present. So the syndrome depicts one where a woman is in the position of authority and she views or she treats her subordinates, which are females, more critically than men. And she favors men when it comes to both promotion and appointment, which is contrary to what we would expect females to do once they've made it in a predominantly masculine environment. With the queen bee syndrome, the senior female employees will do almost everything to keep other females from advancing through the ranks. And this, ladies and gentlemen, it's similar to the nature where the queen bee protects her turf vehemently. The sting of the queen bee is extremely venomous in the sense that it impacts negatively on gender equality. So what is our queen bee? Well, she's often very mean and arrogant, but with a smile. She is overly emotional. She's passive aggressive. She works against other upcoming females in a variety of ways that I'll share with you later. She fails to encourage other female bees in the hive. She gives constant criticism over work and downplays the success of other females advancing through the ranks. She will also not advise other females. She will not lead them, she will not mentor them, and she simply sets them up for failure. In my mind, no queen bee no company, no organization can actually afford the reign of the queen bee. So how do others within the organization perceive the queen bee? Other females, according to the research, would describe the queen bee as being unhelpful towards other females. So she has a very strong desire to remain unique. And this is the crux of the whole thing, because remember, once a queen bee advanced through the ranks in a predominantly masculine or male environment, she's treated very specially. She keeps the hive man-like, and she wants to remain unique at all costs. And that is one of the reasons she keeps on being discriminatory towards other women. She becomes combative, she becomes ruthless, she lacks empathy and support for other women. To keep this turf her own domain, she acts very hard in man-like or men-like ways. All of this with lipstick, with a sweet smile. I came across a whole depiction of a new type of queen bee called the African queen bee, and it didn't matter how much research I did, I couldn't find any academic articles on the queen bee. But in the media, she has been described as even more fearless, even more confident, and more determined to change the course of business. She's determined to right the wrongs of the past. She's unapologetic, resilient, and of course then there's no such thing as failure to bring them closer to success. Unfortunately, in the media, and this is the caution I want to state, no reference has been made to the real meaning of the queen bee, and I believe this is an area that we could investigate. I want to show you one of the contributing factors which can lead to gender disparity. Unfortunately, there are no South African stats available. So I'm sharing with you the stats in the USA because this is the late 2021 report. 49% of working white women had college degrees in 2019, and I also specifically had a look at the year before COVID as a huge disruptor. But only 36% of black women of working age had a college degree in the USA in 2019. Now, knowing that education is a gateway or a step to alleviate poverty, after years and years of legislation, this is still the position in South Africa. So by 2019, the share of white women who had received a college degree to that of black women had widened with 13 points. We don't know what the reason for that is, but it is quite upsetting because this contributes to a barrier for gender equality. Now, 56% of black children lived in a two-parent household in comparison to the 80% of white children in the USA in 2019. Knowing for a child to thrive, it's better to live in a two-parent household. Once again, this is believed to be another contributor to the possibility that females are not adequately represented in the boardroom. This brings me to the wage cap, and I'll touch upon that in South Africa in a while. But Black professional women's 2019 paycheck would still be lower than that of a white professional woman. It depicts a 9.4% wage cap for no reason but being a female in this instance. Black families in the USA on average still earn less than that of white professional women to the amount that you'll see on the screen. We know that in the whole skills match scenario, productivity boost would have added a huge amount of money to the United States GDP by 2019. So this is just to serve as background. So if we had a look at the higher pace of education scenario, a Black college-educated female professional would have had $5,000 more in a bank account in 2019. This is just to show you a couple of contributing factors to inequality. There's a myriad of reasons and a myriad of barriers that I will touch upon now that contribute to female inequality. The one thing that I want to focus on today is with the Queen Bee. I believe that the SAPICS Forum could provide the platform to create awareness of the existence of the Queen Bee syndrome. I believe that the Queen Bee syndrome is a form of gender bullying in the workplace. It could also be viewed through the prism of gender discrimination, gender victimization, or even a form of gender violence. Why is it important to touch upon the Queen Bee syndrome? Because it's controversial, because women don't want to hear how mean we can be. Were you to test people and ask them, would you like to work as a female for a man or a woman? Most probably the answer would still be, rather give me a man. And that's really concerning to me. So why do I say that the Queen Bee syndrome is a form of gender bullying in the workplace? Because the Queen Bee's attempts to block the advancement of fellow females in the workplace can hardly be described as a labor law transgression. So instead, when a female senior executive undermines the confidence of younger female colleagues reporting to her, I believe that this can be seen as a form of gender-specific bullying. There are direct links between the conduct of the Queen Bee with gender bullying. Things like being unwilling to take the calls of your younger female colleague, by distancing yourself from your younger coming through the ranks female, by refusing to build a working relationship with a threat coming up through the ranks and rather identify with the males within the organization, by denying the female any assistance in the workplace, and even by taking credit for her work. Those are all forms of bullying. The main one that we currently find in organizations is social excluding. How does that work? I will invite all the men in the department to come and have lunch with me, but I will not invite her because she's a threat to my red turf. So I believe that in demonstrating the whole link between the Queen Bee syndrome and workplace bullying, I will firstly have to contextualize the phenomenon by taking cognizance of the uphill battle that females continue to face in making their mark in especially high-ranking jobs in traditional male working environments. So let's have a look at the uphill battles that women have faced. and that we are still facing within employment. First of all, let's have a look at patriarchy. Now, what is patriarchy? Patriarchy refers to a social system wherein men hold the power and women are largely excluded. This historical legacy has had a real influence on the workplace and continues to be a problem in the workplace. You merely have to look at the sexual harassment claims that we find in workplaces. In terms of domestic violence, which spills over to the workplace, those are all remnants of patriarchy. We have faced numerous glass ceilings in the past, and we still face glass ceilings in terms of both entry and advancement in our modern workplace. One of the examples I can use here is that many organizations still use male criteria in terms of appointment and in terms of promotion. I'm very concerned about the beliefs of incompetence. Now, the beliefs of incompetence of females cannot only be found with our male fellow employees, but also females, because many females still believe that leadership is a masculine notion. To be male and lead is what is needed. So the bias against our own female gender does not only sit with men, but also with females, where females up to today still believe that the promotion of a female to a leadership role is due to male. If we talk about vertical segregation, referred to as bias against women, that means where women are excluded to a large extent simply for being a woman. This really adds globally to the fact that the bias against women is one of the barriers that we constantly face. Added to the before mentioned, globally, women in senior roles experience more bullying from their supervisors, their colleagues, and their subordinates to men. And this is really concerning. If we touch upon sexual harassment, in terms of the law, it is a form of unfair discrimination, which lies on the continuum of violence or abusive behaviour, and this remains a barrier to female equality. Gender stereotyping is another barrier that we have faced and that we continue to face, because both men and women very often stereotype themselves. And it has been shown that women often tend to show greater bias against other women, and they share a belief that women promoted to a higher position will fare far worse than a man. This is reminiscent of the queen bee syndrome. In terms of gender stereotyping, by believing that women still remains the weaker sex, the whole idea is subconsciously planted that a male will be better suited, not only in a managerial position, but also that men are the doers in organization and that women are more suited to a supporting role. Many employment equity plans will actually serve to be proof thereof that most men are in active doer roles within the organizations, where you will find women more in human resources, which play a more supportive role. Education, and I've just touched upon education in the USA. We know that education and female participation in the labor force are closely and intricately related, and it directly feed into the overall general gender equality. So in 2018, the General Household Survey showed that many females aged between the ages of 7 and 18 were not receiving any form of education due to family responsibility and insufficient opportunities. Now, what currently is happening in South Africa, and I'm not even talking about COVID, I'm talking about the whole HIV pandemic, is that there are so many female-headed households or child-headed households that our female children end up taking responsibility for the household. There's not enough funds, there's not enough money for them to go to school, and their family responsibility in terms of the role that society assigned to them keeps them out of education. And this is another barrier to equality in the workplace. This is something that we don't talk about. What about female choice? Or the differential commitment to work and the age factor? It has to be recognized that our social roles differ. The social roles between men and female, generally speaking, differ from one another. Men, and I can really prove this by means of academic articles, still predominantly provide for the main family income, whilst women are primarily responsible for caretaking at home, even where the husband and the wife perform jobs of the same status or exactly the same work. So we end up in a situation where the wife will do the same work as the man, then get home, still predominantly sees to cooking and cleaning and looking after the kids, which adds to her responsibility, which makes it more difficult to take on senior roles where there aren't any time limits or time barriers. So very often females have to end up and choose, what do I want to do, especially if you're still in the childbearing age. Another barrier that we have faced and that we continue to face is the inadequate management of the leadership pipeline, with a specific lack of gender awareness and the positive spin-offs of diversity. And I will show you shortly what women can bring to the table that men cannot. If we talk about the reproductive role of women, we know that this affects the choice of a vocation because the timing of motherhood is biologically determined. And I fail to understand why we don't talk about this, because this aspect must be given the necessary consideration, let alone talking about adoption or surrogacy or even same-sex or even heterogeneous relationship. You can look at this the way you want to, but our biological clock is ticking at the very same time that we need to get into the pipeline to move to senior positions. Once again, that leads to a choice, because most organizations will say, I require of you to work 24 hours a day, irrespective of whether you're a mom. You need to be at the office, because we don't look at out-of-the-box solutions to allow females to go through the ranks whilst they are of childbearing age. This brings me to the gender pay gap, which we have faced forever and that we are still facing today. This is the latest UN 2020 report. Globally, women earn 77 cents for every dollar that a man earns for work of equal value, with an even wide gap for women with children, simply because we are female. This makes no sense and needs to be addressed. If I can stand still at the gendered workplace as a little bit of background, because the gendered workplace simply emphasizes how organizations are gendered and how gender inequalities are being promoted. And a lot of this is not being directly, it's being done indirectly, because we don't take cognizance of different gender roles. What are the other barriers? Well, females are still being regarded as being lower in status, with the very existence of the queen bee syndrome ironically have been blamed for the different statuses attached to men's and women's work. Once a woman behaves like a female, she is no longer regarded as managerial. Now she's a female. So put on your lipstick, put on your high heels. But once she displays male characteristics because she was promoted to a senior position, then suddenly she is no longer seen to be feminine. then the woman fits absolutely nowhere. And this is one of the reasons that men still prefer to promote men whose style they understand. Men say, I don't understand women in work. If she's female, she doesn't get promoted. If she acts man-like, then suddenly she's no longer female. So men say it's a lot easier for us to promote a man whose style I understand, whose psyche I understand. One of the barriers is that should a female wish to compete in a man-like environment, they are in effect expected to act against their nature, adopting the warlike conquest and the solitary exercise of vertical power, instead of the more typically female style of collective leaderships and decision-making. A very small percentage of women succeed in doing so. Now, it is not as if we haven't done anything in terms of gender equality. South Africa has already celebrated more than 60 years of the Women's Charter of 1954, which called for voting rights, equal opportunity and pay amidst others. Remember, when females marched to the Union building in 1954, this was done irrespective of age or color. This was a universal female call for see us, we are human beings. We want to earn property. We want to be able to vote. Patriarchy said, you are inferior in status, you can only bear children, and even the children belong to the men. They are the property of the men. You can't inherit anything, you can't buy land, and you can't buy a house. And this is the legacy that we've come from. Our female labor force has grown exponentially over the past 20 years, and the position of the CEO of the JSE is held by a female. Parliament is quite interesting because women constitute 46% of members of Parliament. Unfortunately, this is the exception to the rule, because broadly speaking, gender equality is still far off in terms of female representation in top-level positions, and I will share that with you now. So a 2021 report by the PwC showed that women in South Africa represent only 5% of CEOs, but females make up 51% of the South African population. 53% of all the students that complete tertiary education are females. What happens to them? Because we are only represented at 5% at CEO level. Question asked. The country's only female CEO of a top 40 JSE listed company, ABSA, Dr. Maria Ramos, vacated her position in 2019, and a man was appointed in her position. Today, there's only one CEO of the JSE, and that is Dr. Leila Fourie. In 2018, almost 53% of South Africans who completed the tertiary education were female. But women overall only occupy about 1 in 3 managerial positions. What happened to the females that completed tertiary education? Pertaining to the gender pay gap, South Africa holds the same score as it did in 2006. So basically in South Africa, we still earn around about 28 to 30% less than our men for no apparent reason. Jobs, equal value, same work done, no reason for being a female. We know that in the first quarter of 2021, roughly about 50% of females participated in the labor force, compared to 62.6% of men. So there's a huge dropout from completing your tertiary education to entering the labor market to moving through the ranks to get to senior positions. Black women account for 16.8% of the occupations compared to 62% of white women. And this is a real concern in terms of South Africa that really needs to be addressed. So you were wondering if I say that the queen bee syndrome might be one of the reasons why females, after completing their study, entering the labour market, don't move to higher positions. But before we get to the queen bee syndrome, I would like to share with you with what women contribute. Women can add to GDP even up to 26% over a 10-year period. Companies with higher female representation perform much better financially to those whose talent pool is low on females. Even the IMF stressed that females' contribution to overall economic growth by saying that greater gender equality boosts economic growth and it leads to better development outcomes. So females are unique in terms of what they can bring to the boardrooms. Females could add a lot of money to their companies and even more than their male counterparts. And this was found as far back as 2002 under the banner of hashtag Change Pays. So females are unique. Even the Fortune 500 companies, known to have more females on their boards, financially outperform companies with lower female board representation. Gender diverse teams, including South Africa, show a much higher profit and sales margin than an all-male team. So the advantages of gender equality do not only lie in a social construct, but it lies in a financial construct as well. Female leadership theories support that females could even be better leaders than men because of a very rare skill, the relational skill. So more women than men are thought to possess the much needed leadership qualities such as being sensitive, being attuned, being responsive to the moments of difference in the heat of the moment, and the feeling aspect responsible for working with these different differences. So we do bring unique skills to the table. The problem is, if we have a look at our highest earners, you will see that SAB Millers walked away with a huge pay packet. The top 4 earners in South Africa are all men. If you have a look at their basic salaries, I'm wondering where the female faces are, and I like men. I'm just asking the question. So that brings me back to the queen bee. I believe that the queen bee is nothing but a big, stinging female bully. So what's workplace bullying? In South Africa, there is no single definition agreed upon for workplace bullying. Even worldwide, different countries or different jurisdictions, as we refer to them, actually refer to a difference in terms of the definition of workplace bullying, but the notion of the bully is fixed. Bullying is described as unwanted, offensive, humiliating, undermining behavior, and it's nothing but an assault on the dignity of the victim. Now, this is exactly what the queen bee does. We know that bullying at work is increasing yearly. 79.3 million USA employees are being affected by bullying per year. In South Africa, around about 1 out of 10 employees report being a victim of workplace bullying, but 45% in South Africa reported being a witness to bullying. And if you understand the whole notion around bullying, whether you are a victim or whether you witness your colleague being bullied, the ill effects, depression, post-traumatic stress, turnover of the wrong people, psychological illnesses, musculoskeletal diseases are exactly the same. Now, we haven't done a lot of statistical investigations around the prevalence of workplace bullying. So the studies in South Africa are fairly limited, but the latest one shows around about 27%. Although the ILO found that 80% of South African employees have been exposed to some kind of workplace violence, inclusive of bullying, and as far back as in 2003, already called upon the government to do something about this. Now we have got a draft code dealing with harassment at work, inclusive of sexual harassment, bullying, and racial harassment. But once again, it's been tabled before Parliament for a second time, and it hasn't been signed into law. The problem with bullying is that we know that bosses are still the majority of the bullies. But 68% of workplace bullying can be ascribed to females bullying other females. I hope you see the queen bee coming in. 89% of bullied females lose their jobs, opposed to the general figure of 40%. So more females get bullied, more females lose their jobs, but only around 24% or 23% of the bullies ever get accosted. So females, we need to be on the lookout. Even according to the Workplace Bullying's latest report, females keep on bullying females. And I believe this is the heart of the queen bee syndrome. Many females say, I don't want to report my bully female boss because co-workers won't understand how diminished, how traumatized, and how powerless I feel. Even the bullied females who decide to stay require a long time to restructure their identities, and they become like a lost generation within a workplace. So bullying can be described like yelling, withholding of information, leading to depression, post-traumatic stress. Ostracism as a form of bullying can also lead to physical and mental illness. Now, this is exactly what the queen bee uses to keep the hive man-like. Bullying, or then the actions of the queen bee, don't only have an effect on the individual. It also has got a very great negative effect on the workplace. We look at increased absenteeism, low productivity for companies where bullying and then the queen bee is permitted. There's a huge propensity to leave, and it leads to a lot of financial claims against the employer. So there's a double-barrel impact on the employee as well as on the organization. So knowing how many bullied employees leave their jobs, I think it's high time that we also investigate the costs for allowing the reign of the queen bee as a bully within your organization. How do you account for costs? A couple of them would be huge legal costs, days lost in court. What about the payment of ill health packages to employees? Very qualified people take early retirement. Those who decide to stay still sue their employers, and the employers could be held liable upon the doctrine of vicarious liability. So what does this mean? If I am, say, for instance, a female employee, and I am being bullied, I'm being sexually harassed, I tell my workplace about this, my workplace does nothing about this, I could be successful by claiming damages and by claiming money in terms of an old common law doctrine called that of vicarious liability. So there are negative effects to both the employer and the employee, but this is but the tip of the mountain, because employees suffer even more at the hands of our queen bees. So if the queen bee is allowed to reign and she boycotts the employee, she has disregard for the work of the female employee. Where the queen bee keeps the competition out, she keeps the man male. She spreads false rumors, she insults or belittles the aspirant female employee. She maintains the pecking order and withholds important information, are both the ways in which the bully and, in my mind, the queen bee operates, with the emphasis on ostracism, which is a huge thing in terms of modern technology. I believe that the conduct of female bullies and the queen bees are reconcilable, and that should not be permitted. I'm quickly going to run through the queen bee and workplace bullying in terms of legal interventions. I thought you might find this interesting. So the USA treats bullying as a form of harassment if it's being done under one of the 5 protected class items. They've got several other pieces of legislation that they deal with, but it's not really effective. So the Bullying Institute, the Workplace Bullying Institute in America, has been calling for legislation for more than 20 years, being led by Professor Yamada. But up to date, only a couple of states introduced policies in this regard. So the UK sees bullying as a form of dignity violation, and they use the Protection Against Harassment Act. But once again, there seems to be a lack of proactive mechanisms. In South Africa, in terms of our legal mosaic, while we have got the ILO that we follow in terms of the protection of dignity of our employees, more specifically females. We've got the Constitution, we've got different pieces of legislation like the Employment Equity Act, the Promotion of Equality and the Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act. We have also got the Protection Against Harassment Act, and we ratified a whole number of international conventions. The most important one being ILO Convention 111 on the discrimination in employment, and we signed the International Convention in 1996 on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. We also signed the ILO Convention on equal pay, but there was a bill regarding women empowerment which was approved in 2013, specifically furthering the interests of females, also addressing equal pay for females, but it has not been accepted into legislation, and it has simply lapsed. Moreover, I believe that the conduct of the queen bee doesn't fit into any specific category, and there really is a huge problem in terms of legislating somebody to be nice to someone else. So how do you legislate, or how do you police making snide remarks, ostracism, taking credit for somebody else's work? Unfortunately, that won't be possible. So if we take a hard stance here, we have to eradicate all forms of female victimization. What can we do? I believe that our draft code on harassment, inclusive of bullying, which has been tabled before Parliament, has to be signed into legislation. I don't believe that there is an adequate remedy for bullied victims in the absence of specified legislation. By allowing the reign of the queen bee to act like a bully, it's a breach of the common law duty to furnish an employee with a safe working environment. Action in delineate could be brought. You can claim constructive dismissal. Some kinds of legislation could be brought into this instance, but it's not enough. I don't believe that legislation will solve the problem. If we move over to soft law intervention, I believe that the tension between women shouldn't be masked. We need to bring this to the attention of employers, employees, and policymakers. I call for open and honest communication, for restorative practices, and where to now. I believe that employers should draft their own internal policies and that they should be held liable for the implementation thereof. There should be sanctions for non-compliance if there is any kind of hindrance to true gender equality. The notion of the queen bee with anti-bully preventions should be embarked on both on the micro, the macro, and the meso levels of the organization, and all stakeholders should be sensitized to the possibility that females may be holding females down as a form of gender bullying. So then the question is the queen bee syndrome a fact or a fallacy? Legally, it is still a fact, but I think we should all ask ourselves the question. Fellow bees, are you keeping the honey to yourself? Are you stinging other females to keep the hive manlike because you believe that you could rise to the top without a whole movement, and so can other females? Are you setting other females up for failure because you are protecting your rare turf, because you are something special in a traditional male organization? And do you still prefer to promote and appoint men to senior positions instead of furthering the interests of the sisterhood? So, my fellow bees, I think it's time that we smoke out the queen bee and fly together and share the honey. I am not for one moment saying that all women are keeping other women down. There are ample examples where females are holding the hands of other females. But in traditional male hierarchies, we still find the queen bee. And I think, fellow bees, that it's time that we clip the wings of the queen bee and shatter another glass ceiling for females in employment. It is high time to smoke her out, because being equal is a constitutional imperative in South Africa. And all females in South Africa and elsewhere should be allowed to work in a respectful environment. I conclude, a change in the traditional role of men, as well as the role of women in society and family, is needed to achieve complete equality between men and women. And I believe that this should be an integral part of the moral fiber of society. This cannot be achieved by legislation alone. So, my fellow bees, I thank you, I thank Imperial, and I thank SAPEX. Thank you.
So much for that. Wow. Really, it hit home. Listening to some of the facts you spoke about around the disparity between black and white females. The voices in our community reminded me of some of the things that have been pre-programmed in my own head over the years, things that I've heard from family, from people around me, especially as an engineer. The earning disparity, definitely something I've seen, something I've experienced. And the one thing I really hadn't thought about before was the cost of workplace bullying. So I think that is something really that's food for thought. I hadn't really thought about that one. So a huge thank you for this morning. What an amazing presentation. I am going to open to the floor for a few questions. We have got 7 minutes for questions. And if you guys go to the Q&A on the panel, you can put your questions there. I'd rather you do it in the one place rather than on the discussion so that we can have a look at it. While I'm waiting, I thought I'd just mention at SAPEX, we really are focused on transformation. And one of the things we have seen is that, okay, hang on. There's a question. I'll keep quiet. The queen bee behaviour, like in most cases of victimization or bullying, has a significant psychological impact. It is so difficult to prove, and even when you raise it, something that is difficult for the male counterparts to understand. Please advise, how will one go about identifying this in your organization, and can we correct this in one way or the other? Secondly, is it possible or even likely that women will be able to prove bullying as a mean of constructive dismissal? Please advise. You want to take that question?
Yes, I will. I'll start with the second one first. Currently, bullying is not a cause of action in itself in South Africa, but it's due to change very shortly. And once that code of good practice has been signed into law, we won't have a problem. The code will work exactly the same as the current sexual harassment code. With bullying currently, even if I have a look at the couple of court cases that came through, they try and link it. I'm being bullied because I'm black. I'm being bullied because I am female. I'm being bullied because I've got red hair, either listed or unlisted grounds. So currently, if you can link the bullying to one of the listed or the unlisted grounds in terms of unfair discrimination, you can do that. I come from practice. I'm an advocate. I was one of the first female advocates in Bloemfontein or in the Free State. We didn't even have a separate robing room when I started practicing. So the whole man-female, men-female thing has been going on forever. Don't take the chance to go the route of constructive dismissal. Constructive dismissal, from a practical perspective, must always be the last route that you followed. So use your internal grievance procedures, bring it to the forefront. So that's my advice in that regard. So don't go constructive dismissal unless you utilize all the available remedies to your exposure. How do you identify bullying? And this is one of the key things. The Workplace Bullying Institute in the USA developed a specific questionnaire. I think that questionnaire could easily be adapted for a South African workplace. So if you talk about the queen bee in terms of gender-specific bullying, or if you talk about general bullying, I think that's a good instrument to get started on. Measure the perceptions or the beliefs of your employees within your organization. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you for that. There's a follow-up here. Thank you. That is my understanding as well. Thank you for the recommendation of the questionnaire. Thanks for that, Prof. And I see there's another comment come through in the discussion. Okay, that's come through the same comment. Any other questions? Here's a question. Any suggestions on books to help with the topic? We are often perceived as having low EQ.
I don't want to promote myself, but I wrote a book called Vulnerable Employees. And within that book, there's a whole section on workplace bullying. And there's also a draft code that I developed for organization in the absence of specific legislation. So if you can hold on for one moment, perhaps I can just show you what it looks like. There are ample books from America dealing with this by a guy called Professor Yamada. He wrote a lot on workplace bullying. There's also a more easily understandable book called Weasels, Snakes, and something else, referring to bullies within your organization. Now, you have to be careful to take one company or one country's legislation and just plug it into another one. So that's why I believe having a look at workplace bullying from a South African perspective is quite important. The book is, well, the one with the policy in is called Vulnerable Employees, and Juta is basically the publisher thereof. But there are ample books coming out. It depends on the country, so just watch out. I don't know. It looks like this.
Fantastic.
So
I'm going to have
on workplace bullying with a draft code which you can actually easily adapt, and it also deals with the different pieces of legislation.
I'm going to have to cut us short. I think everybody's about to get teleported to the other room for the next conversation. But Denine, a huge thank you from all of us at Apex. That was amazing. I really thoroughly enjoyed that. Appreciate it.
Thank you once again for the opportunity, and good luck for the rest of today.
Thank you. And a huge thank you to Imperial for sponsoring and making it possible.
I agree.
So really grateful.
Thank you.
Okay.